My dad broke into my apartment at 3 a.m., deleted months of research, and accused me of trying to abandon the family. But when I confronted him, he whispered through the door, "You've been looking into things you shouldn't." That was 4 months ago. Today, he sat in a therapist's office clutching a candle, asking if Michael could hear him. In my household, we observed an annual event known as Foundation Day, held each year on March 22nd. This was unlike typical family customs involving photo albums and cherished recollections. Promptly at 6 p.m., we would all descend into the cellar. There were no lights, no electricity, just a single candle. According to my father, this date marked the establishment of our family homestead by our forebears. Having endured a harsh winter in 1874, we paid tribute to them by replicating their ordeal. Dad claimed our ancestors sought refuge in caves for warmth, so we huddled on musty wool blankets in our basement for a continuous 18 hours, until noon the following day. I detested every moment of it. The regulations were unyielding. No one was permitted to exit the designated area. We consumed chilled beans directly from cans and shared a single container of water. If a restroom break was necessary, one had to endure. Dad asserted that our ancestors lacked conveniences like indoor plumbing when they were forging our family heritage. My sister, Emma, invariably wept, but Dad would gently stroke her hair and reassure her that she was honoring her great-great-grandmother Marsh, who had suffered the loss of 3 toes due to frostbite. As a child, I was terrified. I would sob throughout the entire experience. Yet, Dad maintained that this was the essence of it. One had to confront fear to truly appreciate existence. Annually, he recounted the same narratives, how the Marsh lineage persevered when others perished, how they remained unified in the darkness and emerged more resilient. He would sometimes count aloud, 14, 15, 16. He stated these were the hours they spent in their ultimate refuge before the arrival of spring. As I matured, I began to question this practice. Why did we engage in this? Why were we commemorating our ancestors in such an unusual manner? I recall once at age 15, my friend Jake invited me to his family gathering, and I mentioned my inability to attend due to the approaching Foundation Day. When I described our basement ritual, his expression paled. "Dude, that's genuinely disturbing," he remarked. That evening, sleep eluded me. Jake's reaction replayed incessantly in my mind. It was then that I started noticing subtle details. The tremor in Mom's hands as she prepared the beans, the complete absence of photographs or documents concerning these supposed ancestors in our family records. When I requested access to family archives for a school assignment, Dad became enraged, claiming I was disrespecting our lineage. However, there was apprehension in his gaze, a genuine dread, as if I had threatened to ignite the house. The most unsettling aspect was observing Dad during Foundation Day. The usual Dad would jest and watch football. Foundation Day, Dad sat rigidly in the gloom, whispering to the walls. His breathing would become shallow, and he would clutch the candle as if it might vanish. On one occasion, I overheard him repeatedly utter, "I'm sorry," until his voice grew hoarse. During my senior year, I attempted to circumvent it. I informed them I had SAT preparation that could not be rescheduled. Dad completely lost control. He seized my shoulders and shook me. "You don't comprehend what transpires if we sever the continuity," he declared. His eyes appeared terror-stricken. 18 hours. That is what we owe. That is what I owe. Mom intervened, pulling him away from me, but I could discern her tears, not tears of anger, but of fear, the kind that caused my stomach to churn. I descended into the basement regardless, because Dad seemed so distraught. Still, the fixation plagued me. Who were these Marsh ancestors truly? Why all the concealment? Last year, I mustered the courage to conduct genuine research. I visited the library and consulted genealogical records. There was no mention of a Marsh family establishing anything in 1874. Nothing about cave survivors. I was on the verge of abandoning my search when I decided to examine newspaper archives instead. That's when I discovered it. March 22nd, 1994. Boy rescued after 18 hours trapped in collapsed parking garage. I felt as though the ground had vanished beneath me. The boy was Timothy Marsh, my father, then 6 years old. The article stated he had been playing with his twin brother when the structure gave way. He survived within an air pocket. They located him after precisely 18 hours, dehydrated and hypothermic, but alive. There were additional specifics in the report. I captured photographs with my phone, my hands trembling. That night, I reviewed everything I had documented. The rescue worker described it as a miracle. Air pockets of that size typically deplete oxygen within hours. His twin brother, Michael, was also found, having been deceased for several hours. It all became clear. There were no founding ancestors. The Marsh family were not pioneers. They were my father and his deceased twin. Foundation Day was not about honoring heritage. It was about the day my father was extricated from the debris. The beans? What a famished child would fantasize about. The basement? His collapsed concrete tomb. The photograph? I suspected that upon closer inspection, I would discern two small boys, not pioneers. But the concluding sentence of the article sent shivers down my spine. The rescue worker mentioned that when they discovered my father, he was conversing with an unseen entity, making pledges, and he had been counting 1, 2, 3, all the way to 18, repeatedly. I sat in my apartment, gazing at that newspaper image on my phone. 2 weeks. Foundation Day was in 2 weeks. My hands quivered as I magnified the grainy depiction of 6-year-old Timothy Marsh being pulled from the wreckage. The rescue worker's countenance displayed a mixture of relief and horror. Behind him, I could faintly discern a small, covered stretcher. My phone vibrated. Dad. The message caused my stomach to knot. Getting preparations ready for Foundation Day. Are you coming home to help? I did not reply. I could not. My thoughts raced through 3 decades of basement rituals, of Dad murmuring apologies to empty corners, of the ceaseless counting. 18 hours, always 18 hours. The knocking commenced at 3 a.m. I awoke abruptly on my couch, the newspaper article still illuminated on my laptop screen. The knocking intensified, becoming more insistent. Through the peephole, I saw Dad. His eyes appeared frantic, darting back and forth as if he were being pursued. I partially opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. His hair was disheveled, and his shirt was inside out. He pressed his face close to the opening. You've been investigating matters you shouldn't. My blood ran cold. I attempted to maintain a steady voice. Dad, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. The librarian contacted me. His words spilled out in a torrent. Mrs. Henderson, we attended high school together. She said you were there inquiring about the Marsh family, examining old newspapers. The chain became taut as he pushed against the door. I had forgotten how small our town was, how everyone was acquainted with everyone else. Of course, the librarian would know Dad. Of course, she would mention his child delving into archives. My phone began to ring. Emma's name illuminated the display. At 3:15 a.m., Dad's eyes fixated on the phone. Answer it. I grasped the phone with trembling hands. Emma was weeping, her words punctuated by hiccups. Dad had appeared at her apartment 20 minutes prior, pounding on her door, demanding to know if I had discussed family matters with her. Her roommate had threatened to summon the police before he finally departed. Emma, I am so sorry, I managed to articulate while Dad observed through the door crack. What is happening? She sobbed more intensely. He kept asking about Foundation Day, if you had mentioned anything about altering things. He seemed deranged. Dad pushed harder against the door. Let me in. We need to converse as a family. After I managed to calm Emma and promised to call her in the morning, Dad eventually left, but something felt amiss. I walked through my apartment, inspecting windows, peering into closets. Nothing appeared out of place until I reached for my keys on the kitchen counter. They were not where I had left them. I discovered them on the coffee table, directly beside my laptop. The newspaper photograph had vanished from my phone, not merely closed, but entirely deleted from my photo gallery. My laptop's browser history had been erased. He possessed a key. Of course, he possessed a key. He had insisted on having one for emergencies when I had relocated 2 years ago. The message from Mom arrived at 6 a.m. Please come home. Your father has not slept in 3 days. He keeps speaking about safeguarding the family. I am frightened. I drove home in a daze. The house appeared normal from the exterior. The same faded blue siding, the same askew mailbox. But Dad's car was parked at an angle across the lawn, as if he had been too hurried to utilize the driveway. I found him in the basement. He sat in the precise location where we always observed Foundation Day, cross-legged on the musty blankets. In broad daylight, I could discern details I had never noticed during our candlelit rituals. Scratch marks on the concrete walls, dozens of tally marks etched into the floor, all in increments of 18. He was speaking to the corner, his voice soft and urgent. I know, but they are attempting to halt it. They do not comprehend what I pledged. Dad, he turned slowly, his face illuminated by an expression that sent shivers down my spine. Not anger, but relief. Michael says you are going to ruin everything. The name struck me like a physical blow. Michael, his twin brother, deceased for 3 decades, yet apparently still engaging in conversations in our basement. Mom appeared at the top of the stairs, gesturing frantically for me to ascend. I retreated slowly, unwilling to turn my back on Dad. He had already resumed his dialogue with the corner. In the kitchen, Mom's hands trembled as she poured coffee. Dark circles encircled her eyes. She appeared to have aged 5 years in the week since I had last seen her. How long has he been like this? I inquired. She glanced toward the basement door. It worsens every year. After each foundation day, She paused, pressing her lips together. You what? I crushed sleeping pills into his food for approximately a week afterward. It is the sole method to induce him to rest. The confession emerged in a whisper. Otherwise, he remains awake, counting, perpetually counting to 18. Mom, this is... I understand what it is, her voice sharpened. You believe I do not know, but what am I supposed to do? He is my husband, Emma's father, your father. Emma arrived an hour later, appearing as weary as the rest of us. Dad had telephoned her 14 times since departing her apartment. She displayed the voicemails. His voice progressively grew more agitated, discussing family fidelity and upholding promises. He made me promise, Emma quietly stated while Mom was in the restroom. Last year after Foundation Day. What is truly occurring with Dad's counting and these basement conversations? I am curious why he requires everyone else present if this pertains to his personal trauma. It seems there is something more profound he is not disclosing about those 18 hours in the rubble. He drew me aside and compelled me to swear that if anything befell him, I would continue it. Maintain the tradition. Emma, you cannot. I know, she wiped at her eyes, but you did not witness his expression. He appeared so desperate. He said Michael was relying on us. I reflected on the newspaper article about 6-year-old Timothy conversing with his deceased brother while rescuers excavated him, making pledges to someone who could no longer hear them. That afternoon, while Mom kept Dad occupied, I searched his study. I knew I was infringing upon his privacy, but I required answers. In the lowest drawer of his desk, concealed beneath tax returns, I discovered it, a leather journal. Its pages were filled with Dad's cramped handwriting. But these were not typical journal entries. They were dialogues. Complete conversations between Dad and Michael, dated all the way up to last week. Michael, they are going to attempt to stop you. Me, I will not permit them. Michael, you promised. 18 hours. Me, every year. I have not forgotten. Michael, it is becoming more difficult to breathe down here. Me, I know. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Page after page of apologies, commitments, and increasingly frantic assurances that the ritual would persist. The most recent entry caused my hands to tremble. Michael says he can see them planning. Says they desire to forsake us, but I will not allow that to happen. 18 hours. That is what I owe. That is what we owe. He protected me for 18 hours in that pocket of air, keeping me calm, recounting stories. Now I protect him. The journal slipped from my hands as Dad's voice emanated from behind me. He protected me for 18 hours. I protect him forever. He stood in the doorway, calm now. The wild look had receded, replaced by something more unsettling, absolute conviction. Dad, Michael is. Do not, he raised a hand. Do not dare utter it. You were not present. You do not comprehend what those 18 hours were like, what he did for me. He was 6 years old, Dad. Just like you. He kept me alive, Dad's voice faltered. In that darkness when the air was diminishing. He continued speaking, kept me focused, made me promise to remember him, to honor those 18 hours. He walked to his desk, picked up the journal. Every Foundation Day he returns. I can sense him in that basement, waiting. The same corner where we huddled during the collapse. The same darkness, the same fear. Dad, you require assistance. Number. He clutched the journal to his chest. What I require is my family united, as always. The subsequent days blurred together. Dad began appearing at my workplace, informing my colleagues that I was experiencing mental health difficulties and required family support. My supervisor pulled me aside, expressing concern, suggesting perhaps I should take some time off to address family matters. I reread old messages from Dad with new insight. Texts I had perceived as typical parental communication now carried darker implications. Family is everything. Some bonds cannot be severed. You will comprehend when you have children of your own. Threats disguised as affection. He was also influencing Emma, constantly telephoning her, reminding her of every instance I had disappointed her as a sibling, how I had missed her college graduation due to work, how I had forgotten her birthday 2 years ago. He was constructing a case that I was self-centered, unstable, someone who would dismantle the family. Perhaps he is correct, Emma remarked during one of our clandestine coffee meetings. Perhaps you should simply let this go. It is 1 day a year. Emma, he is unwell. He needs professional help. He is processing trauma in his own way, she reiterated. And I recognized the phrasing. The family physician, Dad's childhood friend, had uttered the same words when I attempted to voice my apprehensions during my last checkup. I started noticing Dad everywhere. His car in the parking lot when I departed work, a fleeting glimpse of him in the grocery store aisle. One night, returning late from a friend's residence, I discovered him in my apartment building's basement, simply standing there in the dark. The basement here reminds me of home, he stated when I encountered him. Same scent, same sensation. It was then that Jay contacted me. We had not communicated in years, but he had learned through the small-town grapevine that I was experiencing family issues. My therapist indicates that what you described back in high school sounds like severe abuse, he informed me over coffee. The isolation, the rituals, the fear. That is not a normal family tradition. I wanted to weep with relief. Someone else perceived it. Someone else understood. Mom consented to meet me at a diner on the outskirts of town where Dad would not think to search for us. She appeared even more deteriorated than before, her cardigan hanging loosely on her frame. I cannot abandon him, she stated before I could speak. He is unwell. I know that, but he is my husband. Mom, he needs professional help. Real help. She rolled up her sleeve, revealing bruises in the shape of fingerprints. He grasped me when I suggested we forego Foundation Day this year. Not to harm me. He was terrified. Kept saying Michael would be displeased. Then we need to. No police. She pulled her sleeve down. No authorities. You do not comprehend what this town is like. Everyone knows everyone. They all consider him merely eccentric, devoted to family tradition. I showed Emma the newspaper article that night. Her face turned pale as she read about the collapse, about Michael, about the 18 hours. Oh my God, she whispered. All those narratives about ancestors, all falsehoods or delusions. I do not know which is worse. She looked up at me, tears streaming. We cannot continue this any longer. We cannot descend into that basement and feign honoring some family legacy when in reality we are, what? Reenacting his trauma? No, I concurred. We cannot. It was then that the message arrived on both our phones simultaneously. Foundation Day is in 1 week. Attendance is not optional. Dad's message hung between Emma and me like a tangible menace. We sat in my apartment, both staring at our phones, neither speaking for several protracted minutes. Emma's hands trembled as she placed her phone face down on the coffee table. The following morning, Dad appeared at Emma's workplace. Her manager later recounted how Dad had stood in the lobby for 20 minutes, explaining to anyone who would listen that his daughter was enduring a difficult period and required family support. He mentioned my troubling conduct and how I was attempting to turn Emma against her own family. By lunchtime, 3 of Emma's colleagues had drawn her aside to inquire if she was all right, if she needed assistance dealing with her problematic sibling. Emma telephoned me from her car, her voice quivering with anger and mortification. Dad had effectively portrayed her as a victim and me as the aggressor. The manipulation was surgically precise. That evening, I discovered Dad had been more active than I had realized. My landlord knocked on my door, explaining that my father had visited to express concerns about my mental state. Dad had suggested, ever so helpfully, that perhaps the landlord should monitor me, perhaps check in more frequently. The landlord, a kind, elderly gentleman who had known Dad for years, promised he would. I recognized the pattern from psychology textbooks I had been frantically studying. Isolation, discrediting, fabricating a narrative where I was the issue, not him. Classic manipulative tactics employed by someone desperate to maintain authority. Mom's sister called me the next day. She had observed Dad counting under his breath at Sunday dinner, his lips moving silently as he carved the roast. 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Repeatedly. When she had inquired if he was feeling well, he had snapped at her with such venom that her husband had risen from the table. The construction site where the parking garage had collapsed was merely 40 minutes from our house. I drove there on Tuesday morning, needing to witness the place where it all originated. A strip mall now occupied the site, unremarkable and uninspired. But in the rear corner of the parking lot, I discovered a small memorial plaque I had never known existed. In memory of those lost in the Riverside parking garage collapse, March 22, 1994. Michael Marsh's name was third on the list. As I stood there, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a photograph of me standing at the memorial, taken from perhaps 50 feet away. The accompanying message read, "Dad thought you might come here." I spun around, scanning the parking lot, but saw no one. Another message arrived. This time, it was a screenshot of my recent Google searches concerning trauma, PTSD, and involuntary commitment procedures. My laptop. Dad still had access to my apartment. I changed my locks that afternoon, but the damage was done. Dad had been observing me, constructing his argument. Every search I had made, every article I had read about assisting someone with trauma-induced delusions, he knew it all. Emma met me at a park the next day, selecting a bench in the middle of an open field where we could observe anyone approaching. She appeared exhausted, dark circles beneath her eyes mirroring Mom's. She produced her phone and displayed a series of messages from Dad, each more manipulative than the last. He reminded her of when I had missed her high school graduation, of the Christmas I had spent with a girlfriend's family instead of returning home, of every perceived slight and abandonment, whether real or imagined, extending back decades. But the final message was the most egregious. Michael says he is disappointed in you for heeding your sibling. He believed you were different. He believed you understood about family loyalty. Emma's voice cracked as she explained that Dad had never mentioned Michael to her before, not once in all their Foundation Day conversations. But now, suddenly, Michael held opinions about her choices. That's when I made a resolution. I retrieved my phone and searched for trauma specialists in nearby cities. If our small town would not provide assistance, I would locate someone who would. After 6 calls, I found Dr. Sarah Chun, who specialized in trauma-induced psychosis and possessed experience with cases involving deceased siblings. Dad's monitoring game is stronger than my phone's parental controls, screenshots of search history, memorial stalking, and suddenly Michael has opinions about Emma's loyalty. This spectral brother just became the world's most discerning supernatural life coach. Dr. Chen listened to my condensed explanation and agreed to an emergency consultation. She could not treat Dad without his consent, but she could advise us on how to manage the situation. Her initial counsel was stark: document everything. So, I commenced recording every interaction, every message, every voicemail. Emma did the same. Mom, when we cautiously approached her about it, disclosed she had been documenting Dad's behavior for years. She showed us a hidden folder on her laptop filled with videos secretly captured on her phone. Dad conversing with empty corners. Dad carving tally marks into the basement floor. Dad sitting in the dark at 3 a.m., counting. The videos spanned 5 years. In the earliest ones, Dad's conversations with Michael were infrequent, mostly around Foundation Day. But each year, they became more frequent, more urgent. In the most recent video from just last month, Dad was negotiating with the empty corner, promising Michael that the family would never abandon their tradition. Mom also revealed something that made my stomach drop. She had discovered secreted notes, plural, one for each year, all dated March 23rd, the day after Foundation Day. Dad wrote them before each ritual and discarded them afterward. But Mom had been secretly retaining them, concealing them in a safety deposit box Dad was unaware of. The notes all conveyed variations of the same sentiment. If the ritual were ever broken, if the family ever failed to honor those 18 hours, Dad would join Michael. He could not bear the thought of Michael waiting alone in the dark. 3 days before Foundation Day, Dad's behavior shifted. He ceased attending work, calling in sick with a voice that sounded perfectly normal. He spent his days preparing the basement, making it authentic. Mom observed him carrying down blankets, jugs of water, cans of beans, but she also saw him bring down other items: a propane heater, several containers of gasoline, a lock for the basement door that could only be opened from the inside. When Mom confronted him about the lock, Dad's facade finally slipped completely. He seized her shoulders, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave new bruises, and explained with terrifying composure that the family needed to comprehend commitment, that Michael had been confined in the collapsed garage, unable to depart. The least they could do was experience that same helplessness. Mom called me sobbing from her car. She had fled the house and was sitting in a grocery store parking lot, afraid to return home. That's when I realized we could not wait for Foundation Day. We needed to act immediately. I contacted Jake's family. His parents, both retired educators, had previously dealt with troubled families. They agreed to assist in any way they could. Jake's mother offered their guest room to Mom, while his father reached out to a friend who was a retired crisis counselor. But when Mom returned to pack a bag, Dad was waiting. He had been calm, she later recounted, even apologetic. He explained that the stress of Foundation Day always affected him, but that everything would improve once it was over. He promised no locks on the door, promised it would be just like every other year. Mom desired to believe him. After 3 decades of marriage, she wanted to believe that the man she loved was still present beneath the trauma and delusion, so she remained. Emma and I made a solemn agreement that night. No matter what transpired, we would not enter that basement. We would support each other, present a unified front. If Dad wished to maintain his ritual, he would have to do it alone. The following morning, 48 hours before Foundation Day, I awoke to find Dad in my apartment. He sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee he had prepared himself, appearing for all the world like a normal father visiting his child. Except it was 5 a.m., and I had changed the locks, and there were fresh scratches around the deadbolt, suggesting he had picked it. He smiled when he saw me, that same relieved expression from the basement, as if everything was proceeding according to plan. He gestured to the chair opposite him, and I sat, my heart pounding. Dad explained in a voice devoid of emotion that he understood my apprehensions. He knew I had been researching trauma and PTSD. He knew about my calls to therapists. He even knew about Mom's videos, having discovered her hidden folder weeks ago. But none of that mattered, he stated, because Michael had clarified everything. According to Dad, Michael had also been visiting me. I simply did not recall. Michael had been attempting to help me comprehend, but external influences, Jake, the therapists, the internet, were clouding my judgment. That is why this foundation day was so crucial. It would help me remember, help me understand why the tradition had to persist. I kept my voice steady and informed Dad I loved him, but would not be attending foundation day. His face cycled through a series of expressions, confusion, hurt, anger, before settling on something that chilled me to my core, acceptance. He stood, patted my shoulder, and stated Michael had warned him this might occur, that I might be too far gone to salvage, but that was acceptable. Emma would comprehend. Emma would perpetuate the tradition. After he departed, I telephoned Emma immediately. She did not answer. I called 6 more times before rushing to her apartment. Her roommate answered the door, perplexed. Emma had left an hour prior, stating her father required assistance with a family emergency. I drove to my parents' house, violating every speed limit. Dad's car was in the driveway, parked normally this time. The house appeared serene in the morning light, but the basement door was ajar. I could hear voices from below, Dad's calm tone intermingling with Emma's distressed one. I crept down the stairs, my phone recording everything. They sat in the ritual circle, Dad holding Emma's hands. He was explaining how Michael had chosen her, how proud he was that she understood family loyalty in a way I never could. Emma's face was streaked with tears, but she nodded along, caught between her affection for our father and her growing comprehension of his illness. That's when I noticed the provisions Dad had assembled, not just the customary beans and water. The propane heater sat in the corner, unlit but ready. The gas containers lined the wall, and beside Dad, almost hidden beneath a blanket, was a length of chain and a padlock. I stepped into the basement, and Dad's face illuminated with that dreadful relief again. He announced to the coroner that both his children had returned home, that Michael's patience had been rewarded. Emma looked at me with desperate eyes. Dad's grip on her hands was firm, possessive. She mouthed, "Help," without uttering a sound. I informed Dad we required Mom here as well, that if this was truly about family, we should all be together. His face clouded with confusion, as if he had forgotten Mom existed. But then he nodded, stating, Michael agreed. The entire family should be here. While Dad ascended the stairs to locate Mom, I seized Emma, and we fled. We reached my car before Dad realized what had transpired. As I drove away, I observed him in the rearview mirror, standing in the driveway, not pursuing us, but simply watching, counting on his fingers. Emma completely broke down once we were safe. She explained that Dad had been visiting her every night for the past week, sitting outside her apartment, leaving notes under her door. The notes were conversations between Michael and Dad about Emma's significant role in continuing the tradition, about how she was the only one who truly understood. We drove to Jake's parents' house where Mom was already waiting. She had fled when Dad went to the basement, grabbing the box of secreted notes and videos on her way out. We sat in their living room, 3 generations of Marsh family members, finally united in acknowledging the truth. Dad was severely ill and required professional assistance. Jake's father, the retired crisis counselor, helped us understand our alternatives. We could seek an emergency psychiatric hold if Dad became a danger to himself or others. The gasoline and propane heater certainly indicated that possibility, but these interventions were temporary. Long-term recovery would necessitate Dad's participation. As we discussed options, my phone rang. Dad. I almost did not answer, but Jake's father suggested I activate the speaker so we could all hear. Dad's voice was different, younger somehow. He spoke rapidly, urgently, explaining that Michael was growing impatient. That foundation day was tomorrow, and preparations were incomplete. He needed his family home. Michael needed them home. Then, mid-sentence, his voice changed, becoming smaller, higher-pitched. Please come back, he stated in a voice that was not quite his own. It is dark down here. I am scared. Please do not leave me alone. The line went dead. Mom's face had turned white. She whispered that Dad had just sounded exactly like Michael. She had heard recordings of Michael's voice from old home videos, and Dad had perfectly replicated it. That's when we realized the full extent of Dad's detachment from reality. He was not just conversing with Michael anymore. A part of him had become Michael. The 6-year-old boy who perished in the dark was residing within Dad's fractured psyche, demanding recognition, demanding those 18 hours of remembrance. We contacted emergency services, explaining the situation as clearly as we could. The operator took our information, but explained that without an immediate threat, they could not compel intervention. Dad conversing with himself, even imitating voices, was not sufficient. So, we waited, observed the hours pass, received increasingly frantic messages from Dad that alternated between his voice and Michael's. Photographs of the basement arranged for Foundation Day. Videos of him practicing the ritual alone, speaking to empty spaces where his family should be. The construction worker Mom had mentioned called that evening. Word had circulated around town about our family situation, and he wished to help. He had been part of the rescue crew in 1994. He recalled that day vividly. That voice change has me pondering what is truly happening in Dad's mind. Did he practice Michael's voice from those old videos Mom mentioned? Or is this something more profound? The timing of him becoming Michael precisely when the family refuses to participate feels too convenient somehow. He informed us something that recontextualized everything. Michael had not died instantly in the collapse. He had been alive for hours, trapped in a different air pocket from Timothy. The boys could hear each other through the debris. Michael had kept Timothy calm, recounting stories, making him promise to remember them, making him promise to tell everyone how courageous Michael had been. But as the hours elapsed, Michael's voice had grown weaker. Timothy had implored him to continue speaking, had promised anything if Michael would just remain awake. The rescue worker stated they could hear Timothy making increasingly desperate pledges through the rubble. I will never forget you. I will recount your stories every year. I will ensure you are never alone in the dark again. By hour 15, Michael had ceased responding, but Timothy continued speaking, continued promising, continued counting the hours until assistance arrived. When they finally extricated him at hour 18, he was still conversing with his brother, still making pledges to someone who could no longer hear them. The rescue worker's voice broke as he explained that Timothy had resisted them when they attempted to remove him from the collapse site. He had screamed that Michael was still down there, that he could not abandon him alone. It had required 3 adults to transport the hysterical boy to the ambulance. Now I understood. Foundation Day was not merely about recalling trauma. It was about upholding a promise made by a terrified 6-year-old to his dying brother. A promise that had metastasized over 3 decades into a perilous delusion. As we sat with this new comprehension, Mom's phone vibrated. A message from Dad. A photograph of the basement. But something was different. He had utilized the gasoline to inscribe words on the concrete floor. 18 hours or forever. Below the photograph was a single line of text. Michael says it is time to choose. Foundation Day would commence in 12 hours. The emergency responders arrived at dawn, 12 hours before Foundation Day was scheduled to begin. Mom had finally persuaded them that Dad's gasoline message constituted a credible threat. 2 patrol cars and an ambulance pulled up quietly, without sirens, attempting to avoid escalating the situation. I observed from Jake's parents' living room window as the officers approached our house. Dad must have also been watching, because he appeared on the front porch before they reached the door. He looked composed, almost serene, wearing his best shirt as if he were attending church. The lead officer conversed with him for several minutes. Even from across the street, I could discern Dad's gestures. Calm, reasonable, reassuring. He nodded along, occasionally pointing toward the house, as if explaining something perfectly logical. After 10 minutes, the officer began to appear relaxed. One even chuckled at something Dad said. Mom gripped my arm hard enough to leave marks. We both knew what was transpiring. Dad was doing what he had always done, charming authority figures, making his obsession sound like a harmless family tradition. The officer's body language had shifted from cautious to sympathetic. Emma started recording on her phone as Dad invited the officers inside. They followed him willingly, probably anticipating a normal family home with a concerned father dealing with difficult adult children. We lost sight of them for 20 agonizing minutes. When they emerged, Dad was shaking hands with both officers. They walked back to their cars looking satisfied. Case closed. The ambulance departed without a passenger. As the patrol cars left, Dad stood on the porch and looked directly at Jake's parents' house. He raised his hand in a small wave. Mom completely broke down. 3 decades of marriage, of enabling, of turning a blind eye. It all came crashing down as she watched those police cars drive away. She had finally found the courage to ask for assistance, and Dad had neutralized it with a smile and rational explanations. Jake's mother prepared Mom tea while his father contacted the crisis counselor friend for advice. The counselor explained what we already suspected. Without clear evidence of immediate danger, authorities were reluctant to intervene in family matters. Dad, presenting as calm and rational, made involuntary commitment nearly impossible. Emma kept checking her phone obsessively. Dad had been messaging her every few minutes, alternating between his voice and Michael's. The messages from Michael were becoming increasingly desperate, imploring her to return home, stating he was frightened and alone. The psychological torment was precise and relentless. I made a decision that contravened every expert recommendation. If the system would not aid us, I would return and document everything myself. Obtain video evidence of Dad's preparations, his conversations with Michael, the gasoline and propane, something authorities could not dismiss. Mom attempted to dissuade me, but I explained that we required proof. Real, undeniable proof that Dad was planning something perilous. Emma insisted on accompanying me, stating she could not allow me to confront him alone. We reached a compromise. She would wait in the car with the engine running while I went inside. The house felt different when we pulled up. All the curtains were drawn, making it appear abandoned, despite Dad's car in the driveway. The front door stood slightly ajar, like an invitation or a snare. I entered through the kitchen, my phone recording everything. The house was silent, except for a faint sound from below. Dad's voice, steady and rhythmic, counting. I crept toward the basement door, attempting to regulate my breathing. The scent struck me first, gasoline fumes strong enough to make my eyes water. I peered down the stairs and saw a flickering candlelight dancing on the walls. Dad had already commenced, even though foundation day was not supposed to begin for another 8 hours. He sat in the center of the ritual circle, surrounded by the supplies he had gathered. The propane heater glowed softly in the corner. Gas cans formed a semicircle around him. But what made my blood freeze was the chain, one end secured around his ankle, the other fastened to a support beam. Dad was not merely prepared to keep us in the basement. He had ensured he could not depart. He must have heard me because his counting ceased. Without turning around, he spoke in that younger voice, Michael's voice. He thanked me for returning home, said he had been so frightened waiting alone. Then his voice shifted back to normal, explaining that Michael now understood why the family could not come. They were too influenced by the outside world, but that was acceptable. He and Michael would complete the ritual together. I attempted to reason with him, explaining that Mom and Emma were worried, that we all loved him and wished to help. Dad laughed, not cruelly, but with genuine warmth. He said he knew we loved him and he loved us too. That is why he was doing this, to uphold his promise, to ensure Michael was never abandoned again. The arithmetic was simple, he explained, 18 hours every year for 30 years. That amounted to 540 hours he had dedicated to Michael. But it was not enough. Would never be enough. Michael had spent his final hours keeping Timothy calm, recounting stories, slowly perishing in the dark so his brother could survive. The debt could never be repaid unless Dad held up a key, the one to his ankle chain. He explained that he would wait the full 18 hours as always. But this time, when it concluded, he had a choice. Unlock the chain and continue the cycle next year, or drop the key down the old heating grate where no one could retrieve it. Stay with Michael forever. Finally balance the scales. I implored him to ascend the stairs, to speak with Dr. Chan, to try medication or therapy or anything else. Dad's response chilled me. He said he had already attempted therapy years ago when I was young. The therapist had desired him to release Michael, to process his grief. But letting go meant breaking his promise. It meant leaving a 6-year-old boy alone in the dark forever. So, he had ceased attending. Informed Mom the therapist said he was fine. And for a while, the ritual had sufficed. 18 hours a year to honor his brother, to uphold his promise. But lately, Michael's voice had been growing louder, the guilt heavier, the counting constant. Dad looked at me, then truly looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the father I remembered from childhood, the one who taught me to ride a bicycle and cheered at my soccer matches. He asked me to convey his apologies to Emma for frightening her, to tell Mom he loved her, to recall the positive moments, not this. Then he turned back to his circle and resumed counting. I ran up the stairs, out of the house, into the car where Emma waited. She took one glance at my face and drove, asking no questions until we were miles away. When I finally explained what I had witnessed, she pulled over, and we both sobbed. We contacted emergency services again, reporting the chain, the gasoline, the propane. This time, they took it seriously. Fire department, police, paramedics, all racing toward our childhood home. Emma and I followed at a distance, afraid to hope. By the time we arrived, the scene was chaotic. Emergency vehicles blocked the street. Neighbors stood on their lawns, observing. Mom had arrived somehow, standing with Jake's parents near the police tape. Her face was blank with shock. A firefighter emerged from the house and conversed with the incident commander. Even from our vantage point, we could discern the frustration in their body language. Emma and I pushed closer, attempting to overhear. Dad had barricaded the basement door from the inside, not aggressively. He had simply wedged it shut and explained calmly that he was observing a family tradition and would appreciate privacy. He assured them he intended no harm to anyone, including himself. He just required 18 hours. When they mentioned the gasoline, he laughed and stated it was for the generator in case the power failed. The propane heater, the basement grew cold, the chain around his ankle, a personal choice to ensure he honored his commitment. He possessed the key. He would unlock it when the time elapsed. Everything was fine. The incident commander was in an untenable position. Dad sounded rational. He was not threatening anyone. He claimed the gasoline was stored safely. The propane heater was up to code. Without clear evidence of immediate danger, forcing entry could escalate a stable situation. They decided to wait, monitor the circumstances, attempt to establish dialogue. A negotiator arrived and spent 3 hours endeavoring to engage Dad through the door. Dad responded politely but firmly. He was fine. His family was overreacting. He would emerge when the 18 hours were complete. As afternoon transitioned to evening, our family maintained vigil in Jake's parents' yard. Emma clung to Mom, both of them exhausted from fear and sorrow. I watched the house, counting the hours as Dad had instructed us. 6 o'clock came and went. The official commencement of Foundation Day. Around 8, smoke began seeping from the basement windows. The firefighters rushed in, axes breaking down the door Dad had so meticulously wedged shut. Smoke poured out, thick and black. We could hear shouting, the crash of equipment, the hiss of water meeting flames. They brought Dad out on a stretcher, unconscious but breathing, overcome by smoke inhalation. The propane heater had malfunctioned, though whether by accident or design, no one could ascertain. The fire had spread to the stored gasoline, creating a toxic cloud that would have claimed him if firefighters had not breached the door. At the hospital, Dad drifted in and out of consciousness for days. When he finally fully awoke, he seemed disoriented. He inquired about Michael, then corrected himself, asking for Mom instead. The doctors explained that oxygen deprivation could impact memory, personality, and behavior. Only time would reveal what damage had been incurred, but something had shifted. The certainty had vanished from Dad's eyes. He looked at us as if he were seeing clearly for the first time in years. When Emma tentatively took his hand, he squeezed back and whispered an apology that broke our hearts. The psychiatric evaluation was mandatory after the incident. Dr. Chun consulted with a hospital psychiatrist, sharing our documentation, the videos, the 30-year pattern. Dad did not resist it. He sat through the sessions, answered questions, submitted to tests. The diagnosis was intricate: PTSD, complicated grief, dissociative episodes triggered by survivor guilt. Treatment would be lengthy: intensive therapy, medication trials, possibly inpatient care. Dad agreed to all of it with an exhaustion that suggested the struggle had finally left him, or perhaps Michael's voice had finally fallen silent. The house was uninhabitable. Smoke and water damage had ruined the basement and first floor. Mom stayed with Jake's parents while insurance matters were resolved. Emma returned to her apartment, but telephoned Mom every night. I resumed work, deflecting concerned inquiries from colleagues who had heard various versions of the story. 6 months later, Dad was stable enough for supervised visits. We met at a neutral location, a therapist's office designed for family sessions. Dad looked older but clearer, as if a fog had lifted from his features. He spoke carefully, acknowledging the pain he had inflicted while avoiding the spiral of guilt that had ensnared him for so long. He told us about Michael, not the voice in his head, but his actual brother, a boy who adored dinosaurs and detested vegetables, who always allowed Timothy to win at games, who sang silly songs when Timothy became frightened. For the first time in 30 years, Dad was recalling Michael as he had actually been, not as a burden of obligation and guilt. The warehouse at the collapse site. Dad admitted he had been visiting it, but not to maintain a shrine. He had been attempting to comprehend why that place held such power over him. The therapist helped him realize he had been endeavoring to control trauma by returning to its origin, trying to conquer fear by confronting it repeatedly. Mom filed for separation, not divorce. She loved Dad, but could not return to enabling his illness. She needed to heal as well, to comprehend her own role in sustaining the toxic dynamic. They attended couples counseling separately and together, working through 3 decades of accumulated damage. Emma struggled the most. She had internalized Dad's manipulation, believed she was responsible for continuing the tradition. Her own therapy focused on liberating herself from that narrative, on understanding that love did not mean enabling someone's self-destruction. As for me, I carried my own guilt for not discerning Dad's illness sooner, for participating in the ritual all those years, for the final confrontation that nearly claimed him. My therapist reminded me that children are not responsible for their parents' trauma, that recognizing abuse does not equate to not loving the abuser. Foundation Day arrived again the next year, March 22nd. Dad was in a residential treatment facility, undergoing exposure therapy with trained professionals. Mom was taking pottery classes, rediscovering herself after decades of managing Dad's illness. Emma had begun dating someone who knew our family history and loved her regardless. I spent the day normally, went to work, had lunch with a colleague, watched a movie that evening. But at 6 o'clock, I lit a candle. Not for 18 hours, not in a basement, just a moment of acknowledgement for two boys who had endured an unimaginable trauma, and for the family still learning to recover from its repercussions. The candle flickered in my apartment window as I contemplated cycles and their disruption, about promises that bind and affection that sometimes entails letting go, about the distinction between honoring the past and being ensnared by it. I extinguished the candle after a few minutes and prepared dinner. Life persisted, imperfectly, but progressing. The Marsh family tradition had finally concluded, replaced by something more challenging but healthier, the ongoing endeavor of recovery. Dad telephoned that evening from the treatment center. Brief check-ins were part of his therapy. He sounded weary but present, inquiring about my day, sharing a small breakthrough from a group session. Neither of us mentioned what day it was. We did not need to. The date had lost its influence over us, becoming just another square on the calendar. After we concluded the call, I sat in the gathering darkness of my apartment, not counting hours or making pledges to phantoms, just breathing, existing, permitting myself to be free from the basement of inherited trauma. It was not a dramatic conclusion. No neat resolution or flawless healing. Just a family slowly and imperfectly learning how to coexist with their history without being defined by it. The true work was just commencing. Hello everyone. This is Mini Fable Fever.